oh, if I have to go to therapy, it means something is wrong. No, why can't it be that I want to make something right?
Like, okay, they're at this age now. What am I seeing that's happening in the world? Okay, well, you need to look out for A, B, and C.
Yeah, like she's grasping, okay, I have this emotion. How do I own it? What are the tools that I can use to empower me versus continue to hurt me, which is huge. I think that's like the key part.
I held on to the idea that I needed to be strong, right? I'm the older sister.
Yeah.
I have to.
Imagine how much better off our generation would be if our parents were like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I got high, and it wasn't a good thing. Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Real, where we have real conversations with extraordinary people in multi-million-dollar homes. And today, y'all, I say it all the time, but I really mean it every single time. We have an amazing episode. We have 3 dynamic women that are going to be talking about keeping a brave face. You know we all do it, right? Those strong women that have the brave faces, but inside they struggle. We all have been in that place. And we're going to talk about our journeys individually and collectively on how we actually overcame and what are some of the things that we can do to just give us the protection that we need and just to be vulnerable. So get ready, get your popcorn, get your wine, get all the things, because we're going in. Ready, set, and here we go. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you for coming, guys.
Y'all look so wonderfully nervous. And I love it. First, I want to say thank you so much, like seriously, from the bottom of my heart, for being guests today. Yes. So just a little backstory. We have Brittany Giles here. We have Lisa Liquor Ricks. I got it right. Yes. And then we have Sam Kreiser. And the reason why I have the 3 here is because we have some type of relationship, right? So I would say the most extensive one would be probably, as far as seeing from afar, would be Lisa. And I had the pleasure of working with these 2 quite often in different capacities. And I thought it was a great idea because we all have our strengths, right? As strong women, we tend to just wear our struggles very well. So I wanted to have conversations with them just so that we can unpack some of those things, just to see, why that is the case, right? Why that is actually so. So I would like to start with the first question, right? Anyone can actually answer, okay? Whoever feels led.
I definitely felt like, all right, I had to leave. I was like, oh, Sam's going first.
Yes. Can you share a moment when you realized you were hiding your true feelings or struggles from those around you? What was the experience like? A moment when you realized you were hiding your true feelings or struggles from those around you. What was the experience like?
It's amazing because I said this obviously before we started recording, but we get these questions to prep, and I feel like we're going so deep from the beginning, right?
Yeah, just rip the
That's it. We're
Band-Aid
just
off.
gonna rip it off. So I think for me, it's an evolution, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I still kind of operate in that capacity at times. It's easy to fall back into it, and I know we'll dive into that a little bit later, and how we show up and how we perceive ourselves and how vulnerable we're willing to be internally, because I think that's really the first step. For me, I, as a woman in a business capacity and in real estate, that in itself has been an interesting journey. It's an industry that is predominantly female, yet we see men in these roles of power, right? So to really recognize my own weaknesses, Brittany and you being in leadership, I'm sure have experienced this. It's a challenge to be honest with that, right? To myself, let alone with others. But I think a moment specifically around it, I was in a leadership capacity actually with KW, my first time around with KW at a regional level. And I was very excited to be leading the DEI initiatives. And at that time, the Social Equity Task Force, and, bringing my management skills and my relationship skills. And I'm going to kill this, and we're going to, accomplish, and we're going to be the best region, and and we're going to execute. Right. And I did not at that point in my journey, really address some of my own internal struggles around leadership and how I can show up in honesty and vulnerability in that space, excuse me. So I think for me at that point in time, it was very much a instead of being honest, it was removing myself from the situation, right? And instead of recognizing not just in that role, but even in this space that people put me in, right? People see me as this leader and see me as this businesswoman and see me as this very skilled person. And at that point in time, I didn't see that in myself, right? So again, instead of recognizing that I was the issue, I removed myself from the situation and put myself back in a smaller pond, put myself back in a space where I could feel that from the external factors instead of working on the inside. Yeah.
What about the other two? Like, do you feel like, do you ever see yourself in a situation where you felt the same way, or? Because that's powerful. Yeah. Because I think we as women, because what I'm hearing you say is you were struggling with a little bit with imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which I think as women, we do tend to do a lot because we feel as though, okay, I'm not worthy enough for this position. And it shouldn't be the case, right? So some of us, we say, yeah, no, I don't want to do that just yet. Other of us are just like, we just shrink, right? So I'm curious to know, based on her scenario, have you ever felt that way too, or?
I definitely will withdraw myself from social situations if I start to feel like a level of imposter syndrome, or if I start to feel where I'm putting on my Disney ears a lot. So I'm having to hide true emotions. I will
Disney ears.
Yeah, like, putting on that smile for everybody else because I don't want people to know I'm dealing with something, or I'm stressed out, but I will withdraw myself socially. So like I'll be less talkative. I won't put myself out there as much. The after work happy hours, I'm going to have an excuse not to go to. Like I do find myself withdrawing for sure. And I don't know if it's a sense of lack of worth or if it's like I'm at capacity, so I don't have the capacity for more, interaction, or even if it's a positive thing, it's still like, nope, and I just start to shut down.
Yeah. How about you, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say one of the things that comes to my mind is just with like faith sometimes. I feel like we struggle. So just being a woman of faith and being able to determine when it's okay to say, yes, I still have faith, but this is hard, right?
Yeah.
And not one affecting the other, so to speak. So also being a woman in leadership in a male-dominated industry. I experienced, just some things just earlier this year. I have a 21-year-old daughter who had a stroke, about 6 months ago, out of nowhere, the craziest thing and literally the hardest time of my life. And so being able to still say, yes, I have faith that she's going to be healed and, all of that is going to be fine, but still being able to say, I'm still human, and what does this look like for me and my family now? What does that look like for my career? Things of that nature. And I think that's okay for, people, especially when it comes to, not feeling like you always have to be strong or you always have to mask your feelings or, what that looks like, but really just being able to say, I'm not okay, or having moments where you're not okay and knowing that it doesn't mean that you believe any less, or it doesn't mean that, that part of you that you hold dear as far as being a person of faith, that doesn't take away from that just because you're in the moment and you need to seek help or you need to, have that safe space to go to say, I'm not okay.
Right. Yeah. I think that's huge because what you said, you went through something that was really traumatic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Any mother would not want to see their child go through that. So, and yet you showed up with a brave face. So, I mean, that's the epitome of, okay, yep, I got to show up. But you're saying, no, I am okay with saying I'm not okay, which I think I personally struggle with that. I do. I'm just not even gonna. I personally struggle with saying no, I'm not okay, because I feel as though I had this warped sense, and yes, I'm saying warped for me. So I'm talking to me when I say this. I have this warped sense of leadership that we have to be that strong, and we can't show our emotions, because being in a male-dominant corporate world for so long, I felt like, okay, yep, I got to be the strong woman, right? So for you to say that is like, actually, it's refreshing to hear. And if I could share, like even going through, like recently with grieving, right? Brittany, she saw a little of it through Lisette.
God love Lisette.
Yeah, me losing my uncle just recently. And I just thought about them like, yeah, I didn't think it was okay for me to say I'm not okay. I tried to push through it. Didn't know, like, once I get to a certain place and I kept to myself, that I literally had a breakdown. Literally had never before experienced a breakdown. I don't even know if it was a breakdown. I don't know what that was. But all I know is that I couldn't stop crying uncontrollably. Just like, it was just like, crying and crying and crying. Woke up with a crazy migraine. Couldn't even look at a glimpse of like light. And I was like, man, this is crazy. So one of my team members, Lisette, she actually called me, and I was just like, whoa. She's like, what in the world? She never saw that side of me before. She's like, oh my gosh. So she started panicking. What happened? Did someone hurt you, kind of thing? I'm like, no. And she's like, you're grieving, aren't you? She's like, I finally caught up to you. I'm like, I think so. So, yeah, putting on a brave face, sometimes I think it hurts us internally.
And it's going to come out eventually.
It's going to come out.
Yep. Like, I think for you, you had so many things happening, and some of it was good stuff, but you had a lot keeping you busy. So it was just you were grieving, but it was almost like you were putting your grieving on the back burner.
Yeah.
And then you had this flight with nothing to do.
Nothing to do, y'all.
And so your brain was like, hey, guess what? You're going to deal with this now.
Literally hiding my face, Sam.
See? Yeah.
Like tears coming down.
Because there's only so much that you can hide for so long. Yeah. Right? And also, you're saying she was busy, busy, busy. How much of that was intentional busyness to remove your focus from the reality of what you were feeling?
The distraction.
Right? And being able to actually process what you were going through.
I was going on appointments. Like, I was literally doing work. It wasn't like I was, like, trying to find these things.
And yet you intentionally didn't take off work.
I sure did.
Right? You intentionally said, I'm going to keep these appointments for myself.
Right.
And I'm going to just keep pretending like it's just normal.
Yeah. You call it Disney ears. I call it the mask. I put on a mask for everybody else, right? Because I think they need to see me as this fearless leader. And that's just not the reality. People need to see the vulnerability. They want to see it because it humanizes you and it makes you so relatable. Yes. People, again, want to work with people they know, like, and trust. And how can they trust you if they're not seeing your authenticity?
100%. And then, so Lisa, when you went through your experience, were people like, oh my gosh, she's saying I'm not okay? Were they just like,
Yeah, I think it just, like you mentioned, for my team, it was really for them, like, wow, like, not saying that they put me like on a pedestal or think I'm like superwoman, but oftentimes they be like, oh my goodness, I don't know how you do everything, right? You have adult children, but then I have a toddler. My son is, about to be 4, right? So me and my husband started all over. And then I run this, youth organization in several different states. And then I also, was a partner of my firm, at that time. And so they're like, how do you really like do everything? Like, you got to be like superhuman. So I think it kind of humanizes us,
it does.
And it just lets people know that it is okay to have a bad day. It is okay to sit back and deal with whatever form of grief you're dealing with or whatever your situation is at that time. But it also creates that sense of resiliency. Like, what are you going to do after that? What does that look like? And I think what you do after that is important as well. And so I was still able to show up, once I took that time for myself. But I think self-care is important. I think, really just taking that time out so that it doesn't have to catch up with you, right? Or you don't have a breakdown or things like that. So I think it just gave a different level of, respect, but also understanding to my team to know like, hey, she goes through things just like us. It's not like her life is just, whatever. But after something as traumatic as that, she was still able to show back up, and still able to do what she needed to do, but after taking the time that she needed for her and her family. And that's okay.
I think it gives others permission to do that.
Right.
Fair.
Yeah, like you're modeling the positive behavior.
Yeah.
Of, hey, if you're going through something, instead of half-assing it at work and half-assing it at home, take time, deal with the personal issue, be there for your family, and then you come back 10 times stronger.
Be there for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I always say, like, the airplane supposed to give yourself oxygen first.
Yeah.
I always say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. So then us maintaining this brave face, right? Like one, I don't think it's healthy. Do you all agree that it's not healthy? Like, do you think there's a time and a place for that to actually be a thing?
I do think sometimes.
Ooh, let's hear.
I do think sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think if you're in a room full of people who are afraid, there are times where you have to put on the brave face to give them hope. But I think when you have to do that, you need to have then a safe space where you can let your real emotions show. So maybe it's, for me, for my example is I might need to put on a brave face for my agents and say, here's what we're going to do. This is our plan of action. We're here for you. And I can give them all the hope and the strength. But then I know with my core leadership team, I can say, all right, this is where I'm nervous.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of is situational, even like parenting. But I do think there's value too in being a little vulnerable with our agents or being vulnerable with your kids. But I do think sometimes you have to be careful because if you lead with fear, it can almost make the fire burn harder and stronger. So I don't know. That's where I struggle with my balance personally.
I do like that. And I would agree with you. I didn't think it from that perspective. Yeah, there are times where we have to have a brave face. And yes, we do have to have a safe space where we can actually show it. And yet I think sometimes it's okay. My stomach is growling, y'all. Yeah, sometimes it's okay to say to those around you, look, I'm hopeful that we're going to get out of this. And I will let you know I too am afraid.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm willing to fight. And this is how we're going to fight. So I think acknowledging it and letting them know that, look, we're going to fight and this is a plan. I think that's the way I'm approaching life in my 50s.
I love that because people need to know how to handle it. Because I think that's a lot of it is we all grew up differently.
Yeah.
So we were all taught different ways to handle our emotions. And so the more that people can model, all right, you're afraid, you have anxiety, you're experiencing this negative emotion, do this healthy activity. And then this is how it can become more of a positive outcome later.
And I think the balance between what both of you are saying, right? Because I agree. I think that there is a time and place where you do have to put on a brave face. And I think when you recognize that the group of people that you're leading or that you are in relationship with are operating out of fear, sometimes your fear just needs to be pushed aside. Your nerves are pushed aside because they need that brave face. It's not about you necessarily. It's truly about them and their needs. But there is a level of, I need to be honest. I need to be vulnerable. This is what I'm nervous about. These are my concerns. But here are my thoughts. Here's my plan. Here's where I think we can get through this. I also had a child go through a major medical situation, and she was diagnosed with diabetes. Last February at this point, we're a little over a year out, but she came back from a school trip 10 pounds lighter, and she was gone for 5 days. In severe DKA, eyes rolling into the back of her head, delirious, unable to stand up. And that was, as a parent, watching your child go through such an ordeal and having zero control over it, right? Because that's really the reality of it. You can't fix it, right? And your fears are there. Your fears are there and they're front and center. And no matter how much of a brave face you try to put on in situations like that, you're going to break. Ultimately, there is going to come a moment where you are breaking. And I think that, these extreme situations are where it's tested, because I found in that situation, I needed to be as honest with her and vulnerable with her as possible about my own fears around the situation, because she was 14 years old at that point. And teenagers don't talk, right? They don't want to tell you how they're feeling. You can see the fear in them. You can see their nerves. And, I realized, especially in that situation, that I needed to be the voice of her fears, right? I needed to be able to articulate them in a way that didn't give the fear ownership and control of the situation, right? We're acknowledging it. Yeah. We're calling it out for what it is. But what can we do?
Right.
Right? There's nothing we can change about it. What's next?
Yeah. Yeah. So how about society? Don't you think we often equate vulnerability with weakness?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So then, how do we navigate that tension between wanting to be strong for others and needing to be honest, about our pain? We touched on it a little bit, but when it comes to society, how do we work through that? What would we share with people? How do you work through it?
I think for me, it starts with the mentorship that I do with the young women to kind of teach them at a young age that it's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to deal with your emotions. It's okay not to be okay and to seek help. And it's not a sign of weakness, right? So when you have younger people, whether it's children or people that you're responsible to mentor, starting to instill those things and having those conversations while they're young to kind of change the dynamic going forward, right? That kind of proactive approach. But what do you do with the generation and the people now, that says that, right?
Yeah.
I think you just create more, opportunities to speak on topics like this. You create safe spaces for women to be able to be vulnerable and to know that they're not alone, that they're not the only one that's experiencing, a child that has experienced something traumatic, right? And what does that look like? Maybe going over best practices or practical tips on, okay, well, what did you do? How did you and your family get through that situation, right? I think that's important as well, is giving people tools and resources to be able to navigate and move through it, not just opening the conversation to talk about it and saying, oh, okay, it's okay for you to be vulnerable, right? It's okay for you to, have these moments, but what do you do with it? And that's why I said, I love what Sam said, what's next, right? This is where we are. What's next, though? What does that look like, and coming up with a plan of action?
And I would add to that. I love all of that. And it's showing them the plan, but I think sometimes it's explaining how that plan worked in a way for you. Because it's one thing when the doctor says, well, take these pills and you're going to feel better. But it's another thing when you say, I felt this way, but then I did this thing and now I feel better. We had to do that I look over there because Ben's behind the computer, but we had to do that with our kids because they went through a pretty traumatic experience about 1.5 years ago. And because of that experience, they had to go through counseling. Well, even at their age, they thought counseling meant there was something wrong with them. So maybe not weakness, but they thought well, only bad kids go to counseling. I don't know how that narrative came about, but probably something in school, maybe the bad kiddos had to go to the counselor. So that was the narrative that they wrote. And what I had realized was I never shared with them that I had been in therapy and I had weekly counseling appointments. And I thought, oh my gosh, that lack of vulnerability and sharing how that's helped me cope with my own past. I think sharing that then with them and explaining, hey, mommy went through this and I see a counselor. And this is how it helps me. And these are the tools that I've learned because of it. I think almost those are the conversations that we have to normalize. Because I think the BetterHelp ads are everywhere. The take this and, there's this new company where you can go online and get anxiety meds. That kind of scares me a little bit. But
really,
they're normalizing counseling and they're normalizing, medications to help with mental illness. But I don't think what we're normalizing is telling the stories of how the therapy actually helped.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because growing up, we didn't have, well, I shouldn't say we, I know that like our grandparents or parents weren't necessarily like, hey, you don't want to do this because this is what happened to me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you would sweep it under the rug.
Mm-hmm. I
You know what I
just
mean?
had this conversation with someone.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
figure it
generational
out. Could
thing.
you imagine
Mhm.
how much better off
Yep.
our generation would be if our parents were like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I got high. And it wasn't a good thing. I was addicted
Yep.
to drugs and I had to go to rehab. Or, yeah, I was in a physically abusive relationship and that's why I left and, you know, I'm better for it. Or, you know, just all the terrible things that may have happened. It would have been great to know those things, you know, before getting into adulthood. So, and maybe that's just something that I was craving. Like, man, I wish I would have known this, and this.
I agree with you 100%. I truly just had this conversation 2 days ago. Today's Wednesday. 2 days ago, I had this conversation with someone because we were talking about our own children. She has a child, my oldest daughter's age, and her adult children, and just the difference in the relationship that she has between her kids and the relationship she had with her mother. And we started talking about the generational piece of it because when we were kids, there was almost a wall, right?
Yeah.
Mom and dad aren't going to be vulnerable. And often enough, mom and dad or, you know, parents at home have a wall between them as well, right? So we've become this society where now we needed that open dialogue. So we're instilling it in our children. But I agree 100% where there's still opportunity for real conversations, and we need to overcome that piece of our upbringing that made it seem like it is a weakness to talk about it, that it's not okay to be vocal about your mental, emotional needs, and allow our children to understand that it is okay.
Yeah.
Because that's the change that I'm seeing now is that they are open. They want to hear it. They want to talk about it. They want the space to actually support each other. And they want to know that it's okay from us. You need, again, back to like giving them permission to have these conversations. And Erica, what you're doing here, my goodness gracious, the fact that we're sitting here having open dialogue about our own trauma and creating spaces to discuss this openly and vulnerably these are the things that are going to make change.
Yeah. I mean, is there a thing called oversharing though? Because I think because we are, and at least I'd love to hear your insight on this. Because I think now that we're like, yeah, well, we want to tell our kids everything. It may just be too much. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to use wisdom in what you share because you also don't want to almost make it seem like you're giving them permission to go out and try drugs or things, right? Our intent may be, hey, we've been there, we've done that. You don't have to try this or do it because I already been through it, right? I don't want you to get addicted. I don't want to do that, right? But sometimes with kids, you know, depending on the age and how they take things or rebellion, things like that. It's like, hey, you had to go out and live your life and figure out things the way that you had to figure out, and you turned out great. Right. So why I can't go out and make my own decisions and my own mistakes, you know, and things like that. So I think there is a level of wisdom, but I definitely think that I 100% agree that there needs to be more conversations that's had, more vulnerability that we have with our children to share our experiences, so that they can feel comfortable sharing as well. You know, a lot of people, I know a lot of men, you know, we have this conversation too, and this is like a big struggle, I feel like, when it comes to men, you know, feeling vulnerable enough to share their, you know, experiences or their lack of communication due to how they grew up or dealing with traumas of mommy issues, daddy issues, and things like that, that they've, like we talked about, they've been taught to kind of be strong and suck it up and deal with it type of thing, that they're not really as open to seeking counsel like we are, right? And therapy and things like that. So that's a whole nother conversation, right? But I think it just kind of starts with maybe us that have young boys, you know, teaching them at a young age that it's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to share how something made you feel, you know, and all of these things, so that we're not raising up men that are afraid to share their feelings, that are afraid to go to therapy to get, even if it's proactive, like you mentioned, right? People think that, oh, if I have to go to therapy, it means something is wrong. No, why can't it be that I want to make something right? Why can't it be that I want better coping skills, or I want to communicate with my wife better, or I want to be a better parent? Why can't it be you just seeking, proactively better tips to be able to manage your life, but we don't look at it like that because that's not the narrative and the conversations that are there around that.
We see it as a failure,
right?
Because we need those things. Yeah, and as a result, we have a lot of broken people.
Oh yeah,
a lot of broken people. Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate that that viewpoint too. And it's just trying to find the balance, like between the two, right? So, and understanding like at what age are our children able to understand and handle those things, right? So, like when my children were growing up, I would share with them, hey, I literally would say, hey, when it comes to you're around men and strange men, if they're like touching you a certain way, you need to tell your mom. Crazy. Like, you know what I mean? And never had that conversation with my parents, but I was just like, that's important to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I need you to know. So it's just like, and my husband's like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, that's important to me. Like they need to know that they're beautiful young babies. There's people that do pray on them. I don't care, family or otherwise. Like they need to know, okay, if you're touching you a certain way, okay, mommy. Yeah. So, and they would look at people crazy, but it was at an age where I felt like they could actually, they understood it and accept it. Or, with my son, like, hey, look, you're going to be in situations where maybe, because I've seen it before, young men used as, working with, for money, working with women for money, just like the craziest things. My husband's like, Erica, you're ridiculous. Like, no, this is like true life.
Yeah.
Maybe I was overprotective or crazy with it, but it was, I made sure it was age appropriate for them.
Right.
Like, okay, they're at this age now. What am I seeing that's happening in the world? Okay, well, you need to look out for A, B, and C. Right. And I think that was I thought it was helpful. I don't know.
I've done the same thing. I mean, with my girls, since they were really little, if I didn't feel comfortable maybe saying, you need to tell me if somebody's touching you inappropriately, it would at least be your body is yours. Nobody should be looking at it, and I would always dig. Like if they went to a party or a friend's house and I didn't stay, that meant I had to trust that person. But like you said, sometimes it's family members that become the predator.
Yep.
I'd always ask, what's something that went really well that you enjoyed? And I'd let them talk. And then I'd say, did anything happen that made you feel uncomfortable? And I just always try to open that door for them to say if something did make them feel off. To this day, luckily, that's never been the case. There may have been like, oh, this boy pushed me or very basic kid stuff. But I always try to open that door to if there's something that made you feel uncomfortable, there's always a safe
going
time
to a
to tell
friend's
them.
house. Yeah, going to a friend's house. Yeah, that was the conversation with both.
I think a recurring thing that you each said is that you created space for them to be open with you.
Yeah.
Right. So they feel comfortable coming to you and telling you that something is happening, right? You're minimizing the negative context, right, around therapy, around open dialogue. We're teaching, you said, your son from a very young age, it's okay to talk about your feelings. Tell me how you feel, right? Empowering them to do so, because I don't think that any age is too young for therapy. I think that the moment we are born, we are impacted by our surroundings, by the people, by society, by the environment, right? So I don't think that there's necessarily an age limit. But I do think that it has allowed my daughters to feel their feelings and own their feelings in ways that they wouldn't have been able to had they not started that journey at younger ages. My most challenging one, my Ophelia, my dear, dear, dear Ophelia. She's going to be an amazing woman and leader one day.
Yes.
For now, we'll just continue to butt heads. It's fine. Everything's fine. But she will talk about how she's feeling in ways that I have not heard other adults speak. Right. And owning how not only things make her feel, but her perception of other people and adults for that matter. Oh, I think maybe they went through a traumatic experience, mommy, and that's why they're reacting in such a way, and just using words that I couldn't use at 10.
And I think that's a huge point, though, that you're making too, is it's not just about expressing the emotions, it's about she's owning them, which ties back to your original question of like, is there a point of like oversharing or, you know, a thought I've had with myself is, you know, are we allowing those emotions to be a crutch too much? And I think it's showing people you can have the emotion, but then you have to address it and what can it do for you instead of to you, which is what you're showing Ophelia. Like she's grasping, okay, I have this emotion. How do I own it? What are the tools that I can use to empower me versus continue to hurt me, which is huge. I think that's like the key part.
Yeah.
For all of us. It's okay to have emotions.
Yeah.
We're human beings.
But how do you use it then to strengthen you later versus continue to be a crutch throughout life?
Yeah. So was there a specific event that that you came to the realization that you had to, you know, go head on to keep you from hiding or having that brave face? Was there an instance, was there a situation where you're like, oh, okay, you came to realization, like, okay, yeah.
For me, mine almost happened like by accident, because I used to hide my bankruptcy story. I was very embarrassed by that whole experience. I didn't want anybody to know. I was very fearful that I wouldn't be taken seriously as a real estate agent, having that, you know, on my record, so to speak, this invisible record that we speak of. And we had a class. It was called Bold. It's a 7-week-long course. And there's a lot of mindset work. I mean, just a lot. And one of the weeks, 2 things happened. One was we had to write like a letter, and I thought it was to ourselves. I completely misunderstood the assignment by like a long shot. And what I found out was my letter was actually being turned into my team leader, who was Dave Hook.
Oh.
I wanted to crawl underneath the table when I found that out, because I had talked about my bankruptcy and how I wanted to be able to buy a house again someday. And like, I was very vulnerable in that moment, thinking it was to myself.
Yeah.
So I'm the type of person of I'd rather somebody hear it directly from me than through someone else or a letter.
Yeah.
So I scheduled a meeting like the next day. We were in lead gen with Dave Hook, and I was like, I need to talk to you like right now. And he was like, okay. And that was, you know, that's when I shared it with him. And in that moment, I was very afraid. Yeah. But the coolest thing was how accepting he was. And then he normalized it. Like, he's like, oh, you know what? This really important person in his life had experienced bankruptcy. And he told me, you know, a little bit without oversharing this other person's story about what they went through, but how they're super successful today. And he was like, yeah, no big deal. Like, we're going to help you work through this. Like, this is what the team's here for. And I think the light bulb for me in that moment was, okay, A, sharing is okay. B, now I'm going to have more support and help now that they know. Yeah. And C, how can I share to now help others?
Yeah.
And that was that moment for me, but it was completely by accident.
Isn't that funny how that letter gave you the courage to take the necessary steps?
Right.
Yeah.
It was the catalyst to really where I am today, because I think that sharing of my story is what helps put me on the path for leadership. 100%.
Wow. That's a huge statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't leave me hanging.
Look, they're
out here. Look, I'm trying to think.
Oh, like so funny. I need to preface by saying, strong women just like, are you really making me talk?
I know.
Honest.
I'm like sweating.
Yeah,
Listen, I kicked off the thing rambling about leaders.
I will say affectionately call it the KIR community is very, very seriously, if you look at the comments, it's a safe space, and this is how we get healing done, and a community. I love what we're building here. So, yeah, we're good.
Yep. Sure, I'll share. So for me, I think it was, to piggyback on the situation with my daughter that happened in February. And so after taking some time off, kind of like reevaluating what does that look like, being in a leadership role, being a partner of my firm. I actually was the first African-American woman partner of my firm in 120 years that the company has been. 120 years. Our office in Harrisburg has been around. And so that was a big accomplishment for me. And that was super important because representation to me matters, especially with the young women that I serve in the community. So that partner role in itself was kind of not as like, oh, I arrived. I'm a very humble person, so it wasn't like that. But I think me having to
own it.
Thank you. Me having to then almost have to give that up, right? That was hard for me because how do you lead a team of 15 plus? How do you continue to hire 8+ financial professionals every single year, hire, train, and develop them to the best of their ability when you have to fully show up in this season at home for your family? What does that look like? And I think for me, I struggled with it for months. I didn't make a decision until into April almost to transition. But what I found when I sat down and I had a conversation with my managing partner, we kind of talked about like the options, like, okay, well, what would be the best case scenario for you and your family right now, right? And what I realized was that when I opened up and I had that conversation of what my fears were, what concerned me about making the transition and, not almost feeling like a failure, in my role, because I did it successfully 2.5 years, but being okay with saying, this is what I need for me and my family right now, regardless of anything else or worrying about what anybody else has to say or, my feelings about that. But what do I need in this moment? And when I opened up and I talked about that, I actually got a better deal than what I was doing. So funny, I was able to go back to running my own financial firm, which is what I really love to do anyways, is sitting down one-on-one with families, business owners, and doing that. But the company also still pays me to hire, train, and develop financial professionals. It's just that I do it on my own time. I don't have a set time. I don't ever have to go to the office. I have so much flexibility. I can still travel with my family and do the things that I love to do. But it's on my own time that I get to do that. And so I was like, wow, like, why was I fighting this? Like, why was I fighting to have this conversation when in the beginning, when it happened, if I would have just been honest and came to my management team to say, hey, for me, I think because we're so used to being strong and saying, I got it and I can do this no matter what's going on, that was my mindset. Oh, I can still be a partner. I can still show up for my team of 15. I can still do this and still be present for my daughter, who needs me the most right now. But the reality was I couldn't. And you have to be okay with saying, in this season of my life with what's going on, this is what works best for me, and seeing what that looks like. And so they still have my partner position on hold. And they always ask me like, when do you think you're going to work? I'm like, I got the best of both worlds now. Like, why would I ever come back? Like,
a sabbatical.
I still get to do what I need to do on both ends. And it's so much more like everybody. So it's funny when I see my management team, when I go in now, they're like, oh my goodness, you're glowing. You're making us jealous. Like, you get to do what you love to do, and not have to be tied down and not to have so much like commitment and responsibility of what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis. So I love it. It's the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is really awesome. And you did a great job skirting the hard question. Where I love that. Did y'all see that? She did so great. She's like, no, I got one for you.
I got one for you.
No, that's awesome though. I really and congratulations too.
Thank you.
That's a huge feat. Like, seriously.
I think that's like the epitome of leadership.
That is the epitome of leadership.
To be open and vulnerable about, hey, this is what I need right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, it's going to sound cliche, but it's what kept repeating in my head listening to it. is when one door closes, another window opens.
Amen. Yeah.
Like you had the hard conversation and you're happier.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Congratulations to you. Yes. Samantha. Sammy.
So no skirting the hard question.
No.
Okay.
No, not
All right.
at all.
All right. Do you want to repeat the hard question? I want to make sure that I'm hitting it on the nail. Go ahead.
She's like, I'm getting
Go
my
ahead.
finger ready.
I got it ready. I got it on deck. Go
I
ahead.
gotta find where were we?
We were talking about just taking it off.
We're
being
keeping it
honest with
real right now.
ourselves.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. A specific event or realization that prompted you to stop hiding and start confronting your challenges head on.
Okay.
What gave you the courage to take that step?
All right. So you guys have talked about this in a professional capacity.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm taking it back to childhood, right?
okay.
Because some of this, yeah, we can have these conversations in the moment and we've done enough growth work to be able to have them and, shift with it. Others, it takes forever, right? So some people know my story, and I think I've shared it with you guys a little bit. I lived overseas for 6 years. I lived in Jordan. I moved at the age of 8, almost 9 years old, and to a foreign country. I didn't speak Arabic. I didn't. I had visited once or twice as a younger child. Not that 8 isn't young, but as a much younger child, and moved there. Had to learn the language. My mom moved with us. My 2 younger siblings, and
Arabic?
not as fluent as I used to be. لكن بتكلم شوية عربي. Yeah, yeah, just a little bit. But after a few years, my mom actually left. So it was me and my sisters with my dad, who was very much an Arab through and through, the oldest boy in his family, and like the guy, And I basically essentially raised my younger sisters, right? One is about 18 months younger than I am, and the other one's 5 years younger than I am. So being in a foreign country, raising my siblings, not having my mom, and having to fight to come back stateside. So 2 years after she left, we got the okay to come and visit. I tried to get us to stay here. My dad came over and forced her to send us back. 2 years later, I finally convinced him to allow us to visit again. And at that point, I had packed as much as I could of their things, of my things that I knew they'd want, memorabilia, books, photos, whatever, favorite toys, right, clothes. And when we got here, got an attorney, my mom that my mom had been working with, and told him, we're not coming back this time. It's not happening. And that was kind of the end of it. Excuse me. And I bring all of this up to say, I held on to the idea that I needed to be strong, right? I'm the older sister. I have to, right? If I'm not going to fight for us, who is? If I don't do this, who is? Have you ever seen the movie Not Without My Daughter? Sally Fields? Okay. Well, okay, great. It's a Sally Fields movie. Yeah. But it talks about her journey in a foreign country, in a Middle Eastern country, male-dominated society, and not being able to leave the country and having to find her way out. So there are a lot of situations where, I was my mom's confidant. We were having secretive conversations in a hallway with my aunt trying to get us out of the country, right? So these are real things that happen, and it seems like a story I'm telling. And I think for a long time, I told myself it was a story, right? It was just a different part of my life. But I never actually dealt with the reality of what that childhood trauma really was, because we're talking, okay, all of these things I mentioned, leaving, new language, foreign country, blah, 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 blah. But what about all the things I left, right? I left at a time in my life where I was excited to play basketball. I was finally, in a grade where I was going to be allowed to do that. I was going to be allowed to join chorus. I've always wanted to be a singer. I had, life mapped out, and that was taken away as well, right? So I never dealt with the grief of that life transformation or the anger really that came with it. And I think that's why I wanted to bring it back to childhood, because some things, yes, we can accept in the moment and there's quick healings. We've done enough growth work and we have the support system to do that. But it took me a really long time to accept that this isn't just a story I'm telling.
Right.
This is real trauma. This is this is grief that I've never dealt with. This is anger I've never dealt with. This has shaped me to become this person of you have to be in control. You have to be, you have to have the brave face. You have to execute at a high level because the stakes were high. And you don't teach yourself to stop executing at that level, right? And to let go. And life does a funny thing and has a funny way of forcing you to face those realities. But yeah, so there you go. Hard question, hard answer.
Yeah,
open.
And I kept hearing like you had the grieve of lifestyle change. Yeah. So, and I don't ever see when you make a change in your life. That was great. That was profound. Because I'm like, yeah, I guess we do essentially grieve it. We never put a name on it when there's a change that I guess we enjoyed and it's no longer there. And I see it as just, in a human, like someone deceased, you're grieving, but never in an experience. So that was eye-opening to me. It's what
Yeah, I think it's like the life you had envisioned was taken from you, like the parts that you wanted. And I do think there's a lot of grief in that people don't realize.
Right.
And one thing that I love that you said about, going back to childhood, oftentimes when those traumas happen, we're too young to really recognize that that's a trauma, that it's going to shape us. And what our minds do later in life is when something else happens, it could be very minuscule compared to the bigger trauma that we faced. But your brain will say, well, this looks and feels kind of like that moment. And it like does a Rolodex in your brain and you don't even know it's happening. So then you might start acting with anxiety or anger.
Trauma response.
It's a trauma response and you don't even know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And the only way to get to the bottom of it is therapy, is to do the work, to know, oh gosh, these were the pinpoints. And once you know why you're reacting the way you are, you can at least start to catch it and say, oh, I have to tell myself that's all the time, like, Brittany, this isn't that situation.
Right.
And for poor Ben, it's Brittany, Ben's not your ex-husband.
Right.
And it literally is. Yeah, he's like, yes. But it takes, it took therapy to be able to get to that point of, nope, this is a previous trauma that I'm reacting to, not what's happening.
Yeah.
It goes back to controlling emotions, right? We were talking about that earlier. Yeah, it's okay to feel, but you have to identify that it is a feeling that is there. It's passing, and now I am in control of my thoughts.
Yes.
Avoiding self-sabotage. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah. And I was going to say, you make really good points. And I think even understanding that 10% of life is what happens to us. The other 90% is how we react to it, right? So we have a lot more control than we really think that we do, right? And I think just understanding that makes a big difference as well with how we handle situations or how we cope with things, how we are intentional about going to therapy, to be able to deal with those things that are happening to us.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. So I have here looking ahead. Now that we've moved past like all of our challenging times, like what are our hopes for the future? Like how do we plan to continue showing up authentically? Is that a word? Authentically. Did I say that right? Good Lord. And your relationships and in life. Like what are those things that we're going to do?
I think continued conversations that are open and vulnerable, right? Creating safe spaces. Finding your tribe, I think, is really important because you can't have those until you do.
So good.
And it's authentic people, right? That you truly can be your authentic self with.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy when we're younger, I think, to identify with people, right? Because you're in the same workspace or you're in the same party scene or you go to the same school or whatever. But to learn what fulfills you as a person, right? That in itself takes time. And then identifying the people that are going to pour into that part of you.
Yeah.
Right. And really support that part of you and we'll call you out on your shit, right? Like, let's be honest, they are not going to hold back. And maybe, I'm not talking, punch me in the face over it, right? Or with it, but like be as honest with me as possible because you know my story. You know my future. You know my goals. You know my hopes and dreams. And I've given you permission to be in my life. And I'm in return, I need you to tell me when I'm not living my authentic self or I'm not being kind to me or I am being a detriment to myself because sometimes we're so in our own head that we can't even see it.
Right. Yeah, you can't always recognize it in the moment.
Yeah. So someone that says, hey, you're self-destructing.
That's a much nicer way of putting it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think too, just understanding, right, that hurt people, but also healed people, heal people, right? And so I think it's also important
preaching,
that
y'all.
that when we come to a place of healing, right? Don't be afraid to challenge other people in your life, not from a place of judgment, but just saying like, hey, I see you more in you, right? If you were to just focus on this, right, whether it's our significant others, whether it's our children or other people that haven't done the work, our friends that we love, right? Don't allow them to just operate out of their traumas forever just because we love them. And it's, oh, that's just how they are. They're always going to be like that. They grew up like that. Their family's like that, right?
Yeah.
All of this settling just because that's just how it is, right? And it's time out for that, you know? So I feel like a lot of us have talked about it and we've done the work. We're doing the work on a continual basis. And I think moving forward, what that looks like going ahead is also in a loving, caring, supporting way, challenging others that are a part of our tribe or that are in our circle that may not have done that yet, just to be from a healed place. Because I feel like we just have to be intentional about really healing our homes and healing our families and having these conversations, and it's not always done, and it's not easy. So it's not easy conversations.
So you have to have
right?
courage.
You have to have courage. You have to be strong. You have to be willing to speak up if anything's going to change.
Can I piggyback on that really quick?
Yeah.
So you brought up having the courage, you know, being the healing force maybe to them. I think it's also recognizing, right, as we're moving forward, some people aren't ready and willing to do the work. They're not ready to heal. And that's okay. That's their journey. And they need to be in a space where they can accept that. But to be your authentic self and to continue to stay your healed whole self, you need to put boundaries in place then. Yeah. Because everybody deserves to be in that space if they haven't earned the right or if they're not willing to show up in a way that's open to healing as well.
I love that.
Yeah, I totally appreciate you bringing that up because I think then as people who have been healed or working through healing, that we want to heal others. Like we know that we can serve who we once were. You want to help take this person and you're like, listen, these are the things you have to do. If you do these things, I promise you're going to feel better. You have to be okay when they say no or when they don't want to put in the work. You have to be okay letting that go.
That's the courage part.
And that's the thing I think I struggle with sometimes personally is like I will think about it to death because I want it so bad for them.
You can't want it more than them.
But they have to be willing to do it. So setting up that boundary of like, okay, I've given them the tools. They know I'm here when they're ready. And you just have to be okay sometimes closing that door and they have to experience their journey how they choose to.
This is a great conversation. We went well over the time that I promised some folks on this. Holy moly, y'all. But this is how it always is. Now, true story. The only three people that really know each other, and then Lisa, you did the darn thing today. Yeah, she just came right on in. Yeah, seriously. She just came right in. I said, hey, Lisa, you want to stay? Yeah, sure, I'll stay. Didn't know what she was getting into.
Didn't know.
The other two had fair play. They knew what was going on. We always get together. We have great conversations. So I appreciate all three of you. Thank you so much. Hey, and quickly, if this episode resonated with you or you know someone that probably would add value to their life, please share it. And if you want to hear more of this stuff, good, true, just like raw and uncensored and real and empowering conversations, subscribe because we have more to come. And until next time, we'll see ya. Thank you so much.